Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. I want to pose 3 rhetorical questions to you today. I don't want you to answer out loud. I want you to pause and think about the answer to these questions and try and decide an answer in your head. The first question is, can a Jew be anti-Semitic? The second question is, can an African American be racist? And the third question is, can an elderly person be ageist? Well, chances are, if you answered yes to one of them, you probably answered yes to all of them. And if you answered no to one of them, you probably answered no to all of them. I have been asking myself this question for the last few weeks and months in particular. And something I saw on the internet has caused this question to rise to the surface for me. It was something in which I had addressed on Yom Kippur, and then more data and information had risen to the surface that made this conversation for me even harder to absorb. It was an interview that I saw on HBO Axios, led by Alexi McCammon, who had the opportunity to interview Ben and Jerry of ice cream fame and ask them about their position at 70 years young in the company, decisions that they have made and continue to make towards social justice, and in particular, the choice that they have made to stop selling ice cream in what they deem occupied territories of Israel. Usually, I speak from notes extemporaneously, but on this interview, with your permission, I'd like to put my glasses on and read the transcript. Were it not Shabbat, I would put a TV screen here for all of us to watch, but all you need to do when you go home is put on YouTube and search Axios, Ben and Jerry, and don't watch any clip that's shorter than the 4-minute and 52-second clip, because that's just a segment. You want to catch the meat of the interview so that you get all of its context. Alexi asked, why is it that you are boycotting Israel? To which they said, well, we are making a decision that we believe is in line with our values. Alexi then said, but isn't that a hurt economically to the state of Israel? To which Ben Cohen said, not really. It doesn't make much of an economic impact. We're only looking to make an impact on everybody socially. She says, well, it does affect the economy, to which he says, it's a drop in the bucket. What we're really trying to do is take a stand about something that is important to us, not affect the economy. To which Alexi then says, okay, you guys are really big proponents of voting rights. Why are you still selling ice cream in Georgia? Texas, abortion bans. Why are you still selling ice cream in Texas, knowing that women now have such a hard time getting an abortion, according to the new laws? Great questions. The questions didn't bother me at all. What I'm about to read to you is what stung me like a spear in my chest. Ben Cohen said to those questions, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I don't know what that would accomplish. You know, we're working on those issues. We're working on voting rights. I think you ask a really good question. And I think I'd have to sit down and think about it for a bit. I'm playing Freud and someone who has seen the video, because for me to recap it in words doesn't give it full justice. He was appreciative of the question, and he said thoughtfully, I'd have to think about that question. There's more. Hold on, there's more. And I think in an earnest way, he was saying, I don't know why we don't do that. I don't know what that would accomplish by not selling ice cream in Georgia or Texas. But we are working on those issues. It then continued. When pressed on the Texas limits on women's access to abortion, Cohen said to McCammon, well, by that reasoning, we shouldn't sell ice cream anywhere. I have issues on what's going on in almost every single state in this country. By that reasoning, we shouldn't be selling ice cream anywhere. My question to Ben and Jerry is, okay, I respect your candor, I respect your honesty, and I love your ice cream. I do. Can you tell me why you are going to put an onus and responsibility on the state of Israel, a state where you don't even live, that you refuse to consider putting on in the country where you live and where you have voting rights? Why are you as Jews holding Israel to a different standard? If you claim, as they do, and I believe them, that they believe in a two-state solution, as I do, as most Israeli governments have, as the American government has as well, okay, I get that. But why choose Israel of all countries? Why is that the place that we are choosing to actively say we're not going to sell ice cream in these disputed territories in the West Bank? Which, by the way, has in and of itself some problems. Because you're not only saying that we're not going to sell the ice cream in the West Bank, you're denying Jews who live in the West Bank the ice cream, you're also denying Palestinians who live in the West Bank the same ice cream. Why? What does that do in the end? Listening to this interview with Ben and Jerry gave me a severe case of deja vu. It was 2013, December, and the ASA, the American Society of Academics, decided that they were going to mount a protest and a boycott against academics from Israel. They had chosen that they would no longer allow Israeli academics to be part of their society or their academics to be part of Israeli societies, and that those who were part of the ASA and had connection tissue to Israel and their institutions of higher learning, that they could not be a part of the same organizations. This is what they set out to do. This is an institution of academics, mind you, academics. Now, to give you a little bit of color, this was the first time in history in 2013 that the ASA had boycotted any country. Any country. And instead of choosing Iran, or instead of selecting at the time where there was a vicious civil war going on and 500,000 people were slaughtered in Syria, or instead of selecting North Korea, or instead of singling out Saudi Arabia, which has massive oppression towards women or those in the LGBTQ community, Israel was chosen. And when the head of the ASA was pressed on this question by interviewers, not Alexi McCammon, but like Alexi McCammon, who had the wherewithal and the tenacity to say, why Israel and why now? The answer was, well, we had to start somewhere. By the way, that is not a paraphrase. That is a direct quote from a PhD head of the ASA. Well, we had to start somewhere. Now, it's not all gloom and doom, because part of the beauty in the pain of that moment was the reaction. In 5 days, 200 university heads, including all of the Ivies and most of the major universities in the United States of America, denounced the boycott and signed a petition saying they would have nothing to do with it. And the ASA had to reverse its course. But why did it get there in the first place? Why did that happen? Why are we at a place now that it looks like over $1 billion is going to be divested from Unilever from 6 different states in the country that have laws against anti-BDS? Why does this happen? While looking at this case, something painful and scary and frightening happened last weekend in Washington, D.C., and I would bet most of you don't know about it. There's an organization in Washington by the name of Sunrise. And Sunrise is a not-for-profit organization, and to be fair, they have a chapter and headquarters in Washington, D.C., but they are across the country. And their primary goal is climate change and stopping climate change. Many people involved in Sunrise would probably find themselves in the political left and the Progressive Party, but not a requirement whatsoever. And if you went to the website of Sunrise, these are their top principles that are listed. We are a movement to stop climate change and create millions of good-paying jobs in the process. We grow our power through talking to our communities. We are people from all paths of lives. We are many colors, creeds, from plains, mountains, and coasts. We ask for help and we give what we can. We take initiative. We embrace experimentation and we learn together. We take care of ourselves and each other, and we take care of our shared home, this planet. We unite with other movements for change. Sounds like a great organization to stop climate change. Well, this past weekend in Washington, D.C., there was a march happening, a march for access to voting rights. Now, marches happen in Washington, D.C. about as often as street fairs happen in Manhattan during the spring and summer. They pop up everywhere for every cause you can imagine. So it's not so crazy a thing to see. And much like D.C. and nature, the way that organizations participate in other organizational marches is to offer support. So when we're having a march for voting rights, the likes of Sunrise, which is an environmental organization, says, we're going to march with this because we're in alignment with this, because many of the people who are in our camp are in your camp, and we march with you. And so it works that when Sunrise has a march, the voting rights groups will march with them, and it's a quid pro quo of sorts where one scratches one back and one the other. But alas, that did not happen last weekend, because the DC chapter of Sunrise decided that they refused to walk for voter access rights this past weekend because of three groups that were joining the march. The three groups were the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, the National Council of Jewish Women, and the Reform Action Center, which is part of the Reform Movement's wing of social justice. Because those three groups were walking, Sunrise said they have connective tissue to the colonial state of Israel, and as a result, we refuse to march. It wasn't AIPAC marching. It wasn't J Street marching. It wasn't the Israeli Defense Forces or the Supporters and Friends marching. It was the National Council of Jewish Women marching that they drew ire to, which then proves a hypothesis that I wish were proven wrong, but sadly I think was proven true, that indeed anti-Zionism looks, smells, tastes, and walks just like anti-Semitism, and it's really hard to decode the two if you can at all. Because the National Council of Jewish Women saying they support the state of Israel, and in their charter, they clearly support two states for two people, being told that others won't join them for that view is preposterous. And that is anti-Semitism at its core, masquerading as anti-Zionism, although it wasn't a very good costume this time. Now here's the part that I think flummoxes me the most. The social media components of Sunrise shut down for 48 hours while they regrouped. And then their Twitter and Facebook and Snapchat and Instagram reopened, in which they said a half-cheeked apology of, we're sorry if we cause pain to anybody, we are thinking about our actions and we don't want to make anyone feel unwelcome, which is a poor apology. If my kid gave me that kind of apology for something they did wrong, I'd be the first to say that is a crap apology. Go back and fix that apology and make it sincere and real. It was a yucky apology. And what bothered me is that another group called Black Lives Matter, capital BLM, tweeted, how dare you apologize for what you did, saying you shouldn't offer an apology. What you did was totally fine. And the greatest irony is that when it came to Black Lives Matter, the disproportionate amount of Jews who supported, including this rabbi standing right here, supported Black Lives Matter was astronomical. Why? Because Black lives do matter. Because profiling and offering racial behaviors from police or government leaders or schools is not acceptable in the year 2021, and I, for one, won't stand idly by while it happens. But to then equate support for the state of Israel without any nuance, without any complicated factors, without any understanding of the delicacies of the complicity and complexness of what is our state and the fight between the two nations that have lived there, is silly. It's thoughtless. It's flippant. It's uninformed. And here's what's nuts. The people in these groups who are making this happen are doing it in the name of what they call wokeness. Wokeness, which is some form of being aware and hyper-liberal and sensitive to ideas of anything that can hurt anybody. And I will tell you without reservation, and borrowing a line from my friend Archie Gottesman, that to claim that you are woke, but then you're going to boycott or not allow or not include the state of Israel, is tantamount to telling the world that you are a vegan, but you make exceptions when it comes to veal. It's nonsensical. It's unfair. This all happened a couple years ago when there was a gay march in Chicago, and a group of Jewish Zionist gay women were marching in Chicago, and they were flying a rainbow flag with the Star of David in it. They were forced to leave the march. They said, how could you be a supporter and an ally of the LGBTQ community and support the state of Israel? As if the two are incongruous. And anyone who were to offer that has clearly not opened a book, read a paper, or thought anything beyond this either-or world. Israel is the only country in the Middle East where you are allowed freely to be part of the LGBTQ community. Right now, there are openly gay men and women who serve in the Knesset. Long before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, there were gay people in the Israeli Defense Forces, and it wasn't hidden, and it wasn't secretive. It was permissible. And you're going to deny Israel? But you could wave a Saudi flag, or a Yemeni flag, or an Egyptian flag at this march? That's anti-Semitism masquerading as anti-Zionism. And at this time of Halloween, we need to take some of these masks off. In a world, and in the name of wokeness, where people have embraced identities that are non-binary, those very same people have limited the non-binary to only a form of gender, but not any form of inclusivity with beliefs, passions, or understanding. Someone could say, hey, we live in a non-binary world where I identify as a man or a woman. I identify as neither of those. And the woke world, which I would like to be considered a part of, says that's good and fine. But when it comes to other things that are non-binary, it's either or. If you're in the gay march, you can't support Israel. If you're in the ice cream business, you can't support Israel. If you are marching for environmentalism, or you are marching for voter access, you can't even be a Jewish organization and march and have access because you have connective tissue to Israel. I don't share this with you on Shabbat just to rant, although I'm not going to lie, it feels good to get it off my chest. But I share it with you for two more important reasons. One is to educate you, and two is to deputize you. You are going to be at the water coolers of life. And today, social media has become one of the prominent water coolers in our lives. And you have to be deputized with calling these things out where and when you can. When someone claims that Israel is an oppressive state, that Israel is a colonial state, that Israel is an apartheid state, which is tantamount to calling me an anorexic, meaning you can't see me, or know my loves and passions for a minute and think that. You can't sit idly by and ignore it. You must be part of the fight, because silence is complicity. We must rise up against the likes of Sunrise and those who tried to stop us in Washington, and to Ben and Jerry. We can't leave it to only Alexei McCammon and HBO and Axios. We have to say to them, you're not fully informed. Now, I'm not going to stand here and tell you that support for the state of Israel is easy. And I'm not going to stand here and tell you that the love for the state of Israel and its complexities is simple, or that the complexities and complicated nature of Israel is as easy as ABC 1, 2, 3. It is not. It is very complicated. But there are a lot of things that are complicated in life that I embrace. I love fiercely, and I have different kinds of love. But loving people is complicated. I'm passionate about my religion and my faith as a Jew. Having that faith and expressing it, sometimes in a world that defies belief, is complicated. Our country is something that I'm proud of, and if called to, I would die for. But our country and the way that it works is complicated. I don't run from my obligation with my country. I don't run from my faith, and I don't run from love just because they're complicated. And I'm asking you to run towards this important conversation about support for Israel, Zionism, and a homeland for the Jewish people. And within that conversation, we should and we do and we proudly fight for what I hope one day will be a homeland for the Palestinian people too, but not at the full expense of the state of Israel. Not at its full expense. Not in a way that by providing a state for the Palestinians, the Israelis and Jewish people no longer have a state. That I will not advocate for. And that's complicated. And that's okay. But I ask you, not literally, but to stand up and to walk towards that fight. Because Alexei McCammon and David Kirshner and Bibi Netanyahu and Naftali Bennett can't do it by ourselves. You're the most important part of the conversations that will take place. Let's make sure we have them in a way that's complicated, that's nuanced, and that's meaningful, so that we can reap the benefits, the sweetness of our homeland and of our home faith. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.